Welcome to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guests, Tara Behrend and Shonna Waters. Go. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, watch our videos on YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. We are a listener-supported podcast, so please consider becoming a patron. If you'd like to support the podcast by becoming a patron, you can find a link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for being a listener. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization. Confusion matrix?
Oh, okay. I mean, like we're going to do a structured style? Sure.
Well, yeah, let's just go ahead and get started.
I think that, well, what I love about SIOP is like just all the people you see, all the different, like you got your like poster people. You got your like high-end executives walk around in their suits. Do you like these people? Any personas you enjoy at SIOP?
Who are your favorite SIOP personas is the question.
Master students?
I am confused about the implication that
It's a confusion matrix.
Are executives. That seems like the opposite of what I've observed.
Oh, tell me more.
No, I just listened to the Paul Sackett episode of Directionally Correct, where this conversation came up about what you wear to PSYOP and what it says about you. And I think it was the opposite of that.
What was it? What did we say? I don't even remember.
I'm sorry, you're repeating questions from previous podcasts on us?
No. I'm commenting on the persona.
Our own mic or our own question.
This is highly insulting.
Highly insulting? What are you talking about? No. A great mentor of ours said there's two types of people that wear suits: the high rollers and the low rollers. Which are you? And I was like, yeah, message received. There we go. Now we're in business.
See, the lesson here is that if you complain enough, people will give you stuff.
Is mine supposed to be?
No, you can't.
Hey, Carlton, can you put one of the mics volume up a little bit?
No, it's okay. I think they got it right.
Okay, they did?
Give them the one that's on.
Y'all haven't even like finished your martini yet. Like you're already like out of control.
It's true. Yeah. So you're saying that people who wear suits are either high rollers or low rollers?
That's what a mentor told me.
So you're a middle roller?
I guess I suppose so. Yeah.
What does the data say?
I don't know if we've collected data on this, right?
I actually really, Kurt Krieger wrote a tip article about this a long time ago about what people wear to PSYOP. And that's my favorite reference for this, is that everybody looks really nice on Thursday and then sort of progressively collapses over the course of the conference. And by Saturday, you're just wearing like one dirty flip flop and just trying your best.
Oh, totally. If you're even here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love all the different personas you see at PSYOP, right? Like just different sort of categories of folks. And I love that everyone looks uncomfortable about what they're wearing in the room all of a sudden.
Well, I will say this,
alienate people.
like the dress code at PSYOP over, I would say pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic has much dressed down. Like I remember there used to be a pretty big contingent of people wearing suits pre-pandemic. You don't see a whole. I'm looking in the room. Sorry, one guy in the back who's wearing a suit. I think you don't see it. It's not a very common occurrence anymore.
Well, I lived in DC for a long time where everybody was pretty formal all the time. And when I moved to the Midwest, I discovered that you didn't have to do that anymore. And that was very freeing. So I think that's maybe we're all getting more Midwestern, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, what did you do in DC, by the way?
I worked at George Washington for 11 years.
Oh, I didn't know that. I knew you were in Michigan State, right?
I just got to Michigan State last year.
Wow, that shows how much I know. What we were talking about was the efficacy of tarot card reading, which then led into
wait, what?
That the MBTI, although not predictive, still may have some essential uses.
Yeah,
that is the tee-up.
I remember that now.
Yeah, we did say that.
Right. So I think I think what we said was that I work with a lot of people who are excited about the Myers-Briggs and they're like, look at this cool thing. It gave you so much insight. And the truth is that it does help them start thinking in a language that they didn't have before. And it does give them tools to resolve conflict and to start reflection processes. And I'm totally supportive of that. I'm just not supportive of using it to predict something about the future, which is a different purpose. I think that's a completely defensible position.
And I feel the same way about tarot card readings.
Well, tell us about this. So what is the value that tarot card reading? So and I don't want to pose this from a sense of skepticism, because actually the viewpoint that I have, so I'll just lead with mine, is that if some kind of tool is popularized and it gets out into the world, that people learn more about psychology, for instance, with the MBTI on net, that probably benefits us all more than if somebody just, if we're just trying to say, well, you should only use the MBTI, which I don't think any of us would recommend. But does that extend to tarot card reading? Does that kind of argument?
Everything extends to tarot card reading. No, so I mean, here's the thing. I think it's interesting to notice, like, what are the demand signals that exist that give rise to like something becoming popular, and then what can we learn from that, particularly as a field that is still working on getting our wisdom, better known and adopted. And so here's the tarot card backstory, to be fair. So I am now an entrepreneur. This is a new venture for me. I left Better Up as my last role formally in January, started a business.
Congrats.
Thank you. And my illustrious co-founder is in the audience, Dr. Erin Etaw, who, recovering academic, very rigorous researcher.
Where are you at? Raise your hand.
Erin,
there we
I
go.
know she's shrinking right now. She's
Fractional
getting
insights.
smaller, interestingly.
You guys published a cool heat map the other day. I gave you some props.
Yeah, that's all it was, actually, was the heat map.
Yeah.
That's all you need. So we started this business, and entrepreneurship, a lot of ambiguity, very few knowns, just not a lot of known, a lot of pivoting, a lot of agility. And some days you just want somebody to tell you what's going to happen. There's like a need signal.
So let's hold a seance. Is it?
That's a different step.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm not going to rule it out, but
I'm not knocking it either. I mean, like.
So, anyways, I'm not going to lie. So when she first told me that she'd been listening to tarot card readings on YouTube, I
Oh no, she's shrinking so far.
I had to bite my tongue. But as a well-trained coach, I was like, I'm going to be curious and open and non-judgmental and withhold my judgment until I really explore this myself. So I asked for a recommendation.
Yeah.
And she shared with me Minnow Pond Tarot on YouTube. And I listened to the first one, and I was just noticing, I was like, I actually do kind of feel better.
Got a little pep in your step.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Feeling a little better.
Like, at no point am I listening to this and going, this is what's going to happen. Right. But what it brings up for me is like, he'll say something, and then I like to engage in the metacognitive process of like, what comes up for me? And then like, what can I reflect on and learn from that and like discuss? So it's almost like a journal prompt.
Totally.
That's what I find it. And that's my take on a lot of these things is like, if it starts a reflective process, if it starts a conversation, as we're saying, like, that doesn't mean you use it for selection, but that doesn't mean it's without value.
Have you ever seen the Rorschach?
Yeah.
What do you see? What do you see?
Well, so
It's totally frog.
They're all frogs, yeah, actually. But anyway.
I totally agree with you. I mean, some people just need a way to get that process rolling. And I also think it helps you develop argumentation skills if you can say, well, that doesn't sound true. That's unlikely. That's a unspecific claim that tarot card reader is making. Like, so you can imagine that any stimulus might be useful for people to just do that work a little bit more.
I think back to the MBTI, like I generally think that it gets a bad rap, not from its predictive power. I mean, like, granted, I think if you look at the history of it, was founded in like a kitchen by two sisters, essentially just trying to drive things. But like, it's doing something right. It's bringing eyes to psychology in a way that people can, classify themselves. And they say it's not very valid or reliable, but I'm an ISTJ to the day I die. It's like every time. Every single time.
Yeah, not me. Mine changes.
Oh, really?
Every time I take it. Yeah, but that's I'm more of a cusper, anyways.
Okay.
I mean, that's the big problem, is that you made a continuous variable dichotomous. So if you're switching back and forth, that tells us something. But
I did work at a horrible company in Austin, Texas, very briefly. That they made us wear like little paper hats with our, 4 letters on it, and like to try to like celebrate our differences or something like that. And it's like, oh gosh, this is just horrific corporate culture stuff.
Yeah, at least it's not colors based.
The 4 colors. Oh yeah.
It's like, do you feel very red today? Or are you feeling green? It's like, well, maybe. I don't know. Switches a lot. Very little reliability. The funny thing to me is, as SIOP, we go to these conferences, and a lot of times I feel like, let's pick on like the generational differences debate. We'll be like, oh, we're so smart. We know that generational differences aren't real. It's actually life stages. And we're like, think we're so cool. And then you read anything in the popular press, and it's like, what about those generational differences? And it's like, are we really having the impact that we intend to have? And we're so cool about MBTI, but everybody uses it. And so it's like, I don't know, maybe we should have a little bit of humility. But I think one of the reasons why I was very keen on having both of you on the podcast is you are both very senior leaders in the SIOP organization. And you're both matriculating into positions that you get to influence the future of our organization, not just policy wise, but culturally wise. So and both being very senior female leaders as well, what has that experience been like for you from 20 years ago to today? And what do you hope it looks like in the future?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I take that really seriously. I do think that IO psychology is special, and that the parts of our culture that are special need attention and oxygen to be successful and flourish. And so it's the job of people in leadership positions to do that by celebrating things that we think matter. So I'm not in charge of anything, for the record. I am fully retired from SIOP leadership, and I want to make that really clear to everybody.
Caveat.
Yeah, but
now say what you really think.
Well, so during my term as president, I did a few things that were all oriented towards trying to celebrate what mattered about the scientist practitioner model. So one of the things that we did was add empirical articles to the IOP journal. And the reason is that the kind of science practice research that IO psychology has always built its foundation on, that we're all really proud of, was starting to have fewer and fewer places where it could really be celebrated. And I was really nervous about that. I didn't think that we should have, academic articles that nobody cared about, and then practice that wasn't informed by science. That made me really disappointed. So I said, let's take IOP, which is this treasure that we have, and make sure that it's that venue for the best science that we think is grounded in real practical problems. The research community forums that were a part of this conference, that was another initiative that I started during my year to say, let's bring people together who are interested in a problem and oriented around it, a real problem, and have the researchers who are expert talk to each other and figure out how we can sort of join our efforts and build something more exciting together. So I try to use my power that I had as president to build things that I thought would last and be reinforcing and reaffirming of our values.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we have in common is a lot of value for the scientist practitioner model. And whatever I've done with SIOP, I've really tried to bring that into it. And one of the roles I've had in the past is, committee chair for the Early Career Award on the practitioner side. And even in that process, the fact that we separate out the scientist early career award from the practitioner early career award, I find offensive because I was like, wait, I thought the whole thing was the scientist practitioner model. And
are we grading on a curve?
We really don't have we don't have a lot of places where, it is embedded in the criteria and things like that, but it's really hard to continue to hold up and show what does that look like? Especially as I think the definition, I found a tip article where someone was like, what do early career psychologists think the scientist practitioner model means and what are the challenges and everything? It's just very different than I think I thought about it.
Yeah, it's hard as a field matures because you have to specialize so much more to make a scientific contribution, which means that you're getting narrower and narrower, which makes you harder to zoom back out. And it also makes it hard as a practitioner to stay informed about all the science and to do good science because you have to just spend so much energy building this incredibly narrow expertise to make a scientific contribution, which is really not like if we were to build a discipline from scratch, that is not how we would build it. It's a natural consequence of just time. And the way that research and fields tend to evolve. But now we're in a position that I don't think anybody would want if they were designing something.
How'd y'all get involved in the SIOP leadership? I mean, like, there's probably a lot of people here that kind of question how do I become a fellow? How do I, get to be president? How'd you get involved?
It's like gumption.
No, I think, just showing
Angela
up for
Duckworth.
Yeah.
Right.
showing up for things that you're interested in. I think SIOP is an incredibly open place, and it's a really easy place to get involved. So the first way I got involved was volunteering at the conference, like stuffing conference bags. Actually, I was talking to the volunteers who were at the registration desk, and I was telling them the story of my first volunteer assignment. It was the registration had just moved online, and you needed your login and password to register to get your badge. And of course, nobody had theirs. And so I was standing at the booth with a book of everybody's passwords in case they didn't know what their password was. And I would open the book and tell them. That was my first job.
It's good IT security, right?
Yeah. Don't worry. The data's safe. Thankfully, it was a long time ago. We've moved on from that.
And they ritually burned the password book after the conference was over.
But for the record, if you went to the conference in 2004, I know your password.
So I was really lucky in that I started my career at Humro, where there were so many fellows and SIOP leaders and volunteers there, and I started in the volunteer space in SIOP, like many do, which is somebody who is a chair begging you to join the committee, and so that's how I got started.
Peer pressure.
Yeah, that's how I got started. But on the fellow piece, like I think this is actually a nugget that I think is important for like me to keep saying and getting out, is I actually had no ambitions of ever becoming a SIOP fellow, let alone doing it as early in my journey as I did. But the way that happened was I was actually at a reception, and Amy Grubb came up to me, and I think it was the year after I had won early career practitioner, and she was like, "You should apply for fellow. Like, we really need more practitioner fellows. Like, you should apply." And, I knew her well-ish, but like not well enough where I would have like thought of her as a sponsor or anything like that. But to have someone who I respected, who I saw as, a great example of a practitioner, a leader in the field, like come up to me and just like give me that nudge. I was like, So I started asking mentors about it and saying like, what do you think? Like, I don't feel qualified. I'm like way too early in career or whatever. And they're like, I think it's a great idea. And just that encouragement, because I think there's a lot of people who would be qualified and just never apply. And so I think there's just like this important, yes, raise your hand and also nudge others.
Right. And the fellowship committee does not want it to be a mystery, right? I mean, that is not the goal. The goal is to encourage as many people to apply as possible. But I do think there's a lot of confusion, and the focus should be to build up a reputation in the SIOP community by showing up to things, by meeting people, by telling people what you do and what you know, so that you become part of that community. And then someone approaches you at a party and says, "Hey, you should be a fellow."
Do you get a free jacket or anything? Like,
no, we
lapel pins.
Damn it!
Breakfast once a year.
A breakfast once a year. All
And
right.
then we
I'll totally worth it.
We get a little pin.
Little pen.
Yeah, I lost mine.
A cool pen.
Yeah.
Souvenir cup.
Yeah.
But no, I think the message should be that if there's something that you're interested in doing in terms of SIOP leadership or fellowship, that you should approach somebody who is a SIOP leader or a fellow and let them know that. Because every year, we sit around and we're like, okay, we need someone to be the committee chair for APA program. Like, who can do that? And if someone come up and said, I am interested, that would be such a gift, right? But I don't think we have sophisticated enough systems to be able to find you unless you say something.
Well, both of you at one point or another brought up the scientist practitioner gap. One of the things that I think, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody say this, but I'm going to kind of trademark it, the scientist practitioner partner gap, which would be SIOP is expanding. Every year, more and more non-IO psychologists are attending, and usually it's because IOs at a particular organization say, hey, we're partnering together. We're on the same team. We're doing the same work. We have this really cool conference. You should be a part of it. How do we navigate that? How do we navigate the transition between, we've been talking about the scientist practitioner gap forever, maybe. How do we navigate, we're adding even more complexity to the equation, and what role do our partners have in that equation?
So, SIOP has been thinking about this. SIOP as an organization has been thinking about this for a long time, and how can we serve all of the various communities and audiences that we would like to serve. Part of that is that we have lots of new membership categories that speak to different people's needs. Like regardless of your training, there's probably a membership category that applies to you. Part of it is you'll notice that the programming is much more diverse in terms of who the assumed audience is. But I do think this is a big enough conference to accommodate lots and lots of career stages and experiences and disciplines and focuses. I don't see this as a conflict at all. I think it's really exciting.
You can still trademark it. But I don't like the language.
I'll publish it in IOP.
I don't like the language of the gap, and I'll tell you why. It's because I think the language matters and the mental models matter. And so the mental model I like to use for this is more of a pipeline, right? There's a pipeline of insights, science, or whatever, that we're all part of. And, there's sort of like everything from basic research to applied research to, practitioners to ultimately your decision makers, and then your end users of the recipients of the way the science gets implemented in an organization. And I think sometimes we don't spend enough time thinking about the slides between the connection points and the bridges between, in terms of like, where do I personally sit on that continuum? Who are my closest stakeholders? Who are my next rung out stakeholders? What do they care about? If I'm not going to do that work, how do I make sure that I'm bridging bridges in my own work to do this? And Aaron and I, at Fractional Insights, we focus a lot on the translation of science into practical frameworks, tools, methodologies, and things like that. And that means that we know where our sweet spots and strengths end, and where we have to pick up with another expert from a different discipline or partners in another organization or things like that. And so the way that I would like to see us move through this is using that as a strength, as you're saying, I think, and figuring out, okay, how do we bring these audiences together to build those stronger handoff points along that pipeline. One model that I think of is, some of you in the room may be aware of the Transform conference, where they intentionally bring together these different communities of investors, practitioners, technologists, right? And that's so that you have the customers who have the pain, the people who are building the solutions, and the people who are choosing what to fund, all in one community. And they create different types of sessions and engagement and forums and everything throughout it to really facilitate those conversations, so that you can connect, what is the problem we're trying to solve with.
Yeah, and they have Timbaland play at the end of it. That's pretty cool.
They did.
Yeah.
It's in Vegas, which has even less water.
Well, yeah. But I think that's the beauty of SIOP, right? I don't know if there's another conference, there's definitely not, that combines both practitioners and academics in a way that they can actually interact in a formative way. Even so, I see some of the things that the academics produce as I really can't use that on the job. And kind of the same in the reverse as well. What is being done in actual organizations? I'm not sure that's being fed back to academics to create a nice virtuous cycle of useful, practical advice that we can use on the job.
But I guess my challenge to that would be but we all have choice in that. I think I sometimes, and again, like being in this discussion for 25 years, it's like it's being done to us, or like somebody's not giving us what we need. And I don't know. I was at dinner last night with practitioners.
I think that it is not the right framing to say that there's this sort of insurmountable gap. And I mean, the truth is that we all have a variety of incentives that we're responding to in the environment. And thinking about those incentives and the complexity of the systems that we operate in is a really relevant skill for IO psychologists. So we can bring that skill to understanding the ways that we work ourselves as professionals, right? So academics have a set of incentives and pressures that they're responding to. Some of those are movable and some of those are not movable, but I think that's the more productive conversation. Like, how do you remove those blocks? How do you remove or introduce new incentives that would encourage different kind of work to happen? But, speaking as a person who works in a university, I don't get bonus points for doing work that matters. I do work that matters because I care about it, right? But it's not reasonable to ask everybody to just completely ignore what their employer wants to do what their heart desires. That's not a way forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's a word for that. It's called being a leader. I think, in all seriousness, like a lot of the choices that people make in this community that make the community better, they're not directly incentivized to do. It's because they're trying to be, give back to the community, trying to be a leader. And I think that's one of the things that makes this community special. So I appreciate what you do, Tara.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So, how do we get rid of those barriers?
The barriers are different depending on the setting we're talking about. So in some cases,
It depends.
Well, I was going to elaborate, in some cases, people are only rewarded for publishing in a small number of outlets that actually not just don't care about public practical contribution, but actively hate it and would prefer that you remove it from any paper that has it. So that's not a system that we're going to influence. In other cases, people have just incredibly high teaching loads. In other cases, they don't have the resources they need to do the kind of work that matters. And so there, I think there's a role for people who work in organizations to approach those researchers and say, you need $50,000. I need the answer to a question. Let's figure this out together. And I've had a lot of really positive experiences working with organizations like that, where they said, we have a question.
You hear that? That's the going rate, 50K.
Well, that's low. Yeah, that's a steal. Really.
I know. I was like, you're going to get your inbox flooded. One of the things that I know we had talked about, so this is actually, it's not technically an IO Psych podcast, it's a people analytics podcast. And one of the ironies I feel about SIOP is, although a minority of its content is people analytics in nature, because of the sheer volume of sessions, this is probably the #1 people analytics conference in the world.
Totally.
Is that intentional? And do we intend for it to stay that way or even grow in that direction over time?
I guess it depends on what you mean by intentional, but the program committee is not doing that on purpose in terms of selecting content that fits a particular category. Like the content for the program is chosen based on the peer reviews, and the most favorably reviewed sessions are selected, which means that what is presented at the conference is a function of what people submit to the conference. Yeah. And if a lot of people are excited about people analytics and submitting sessions on that topic, then there will be more of that. So it's very completely bottom up in that way.
What do you think, Shonna?
I was reflecting on this coming here, is like, particularly given that you're responsible for this topic at the LEC, like how are you?
That was my lead in.
How are you defining people analytics when when you think about that?
I'm doing this now.
Set up.
Cole hates this topic, but I think we need some
I'll let Scott define it. Scott, how do you define it?
Well, I've always used the terms IO and people analytics interchangeably, but that's not right. I know that's not right. I think it's like a subset. IO is a subset of people analytics. That's the way I see it. But overall, I don't know.
Wait, what?
See, this is why I hate this topic. Everybody's got an opinion. It's like belly buttons.
Well, they're going to start throwing chairs.
I just want to know, what are the other parts that aren't IO?
Dashboard creation, this sort of stuff.
The boring stuff.
Yeah. You on my page? Finally connected.
I believe you.
There's not a lot of data engineer IO psychologists. They do exist, but most of those people are in people analytics, not IO.
As long as you're applying psychological theory, that's probably the safest way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I struggle with it a little bit, right? Because I've written a book on HR analytics and things like that. I've never thought of my identity as like people analytics, but I have never not used people analytics in the work that I do because I follow a scientist practitioner model. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like it's so hard for me to think about.
Well, can I tee the question back up to you in this way? Because first of all, it's a great book. You should go out and buy it. Shonna is an excellent author. But you could have called that book an IO Psych's Guide to Doing Analysis or something like that. And you chose HR analytics, presumably, or maybe the publisher chose it. But why did you choose that, and why is it different?
Yeah, I mean, well, so this is a great conversation too about also the scientist practitioner partner divide, I think.
Exactly.
If there is one, and like
Trademark.
where that came from, or why that topic at that time, was because that was the demand signal in the community. So backstory on that book is that I was the vice president of research at SHRM. And at
Also not an IO organization, right?
Right.
It has IOs there, but it's very broad.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that at that time, there was a really big push for HR to get more metric driven, more quantitative, analytical, and all of that. And there was a big need to increase data fluency, and, arguably this still exists, but increase data fluency and comfort with analytics as a topic. And I was doing a lot of public speaking at that time, and no matter what topic I was speaking about, people in the audience would come up to me and they would say, I know this is really important. I know analytics are really important, but I went into this field because I like people and numbers scare me, and I have no idea how to get started. So the intent with that book was strengths-based approach, was like, you already have everything you need to be an excellent HR analytics practitioner, because you don't have to be the one to actually compute the statistics. Like, that's actually probably someone else. And in many cases, it's like an HR shop of one, like that's a resource you're borrowing from another function anyway. But you need to be able to think critically about, like, what's the business problem we're solving? What's the people question I have? What are we going to do with this? How do I package this in a way? So you need to be a informed consumer of analytics and know enough about, statistics and all of that stuff to know when something's off, right? But I could have called it, evidence-based consulting.
Yeah.
And so anyways, but at that time, and I have a whole, like, in the beginning, like, why is it not people analytics? Why is it HR analytics? And there's so many ways you could go with this, but it was HR analytics because it was speaking to an HR audience about the need that they had. And it's called, like, the practical guide, because it's like, how do we make it not scary?
Cole has a book coming out too.
And we got the SIOP LEC coming up in
There you
October,
go.
which is about people analytics. So this full room of people, a standing room only for those who are listening online. We're manifesting. We're using tarot cards right now.
For 4:30 in the afternoon, this is
This is good. We're doing good. And we're in between us and happy hour, so we're doing our best. But yeah, so I have a book coming out called People Analytics. Probably shouldn't have chosen that title if I hate talking about what is people analytics. You want to do some confusion matrix?
Yeah, let's move on.
The confusion matrix.
All right, confusion matrix. We're going to do some research roulette. Okay, so one of these studies is real and two are fake.
All right.
Your job is to identify the real one. You okay?
Ready.
Okay, number one, inbox anxiety, a latent profile analysis of employees who must achieve inbox zero. It's 2022 study.
Can't be real. It's impossible.
Walking with coffee, why does it spill? Number three, chair envy, the psychosocial effects of unequal ergonomic equipment. So one, inbox anxiety, two, walking with coffee, three, chair envy. This is participatory.
So we want to discuss this before we answer, but I do want to say that the walking with coffee thing is actually really interesting cognitive psychology. Like, there's a really, like, it's about boundary avoidance. And if you study human factors or like aviation, the idea is that when you're a pilot and you're, like, trying to not touch the ground or go above a certain altitude, and you end up, like, getting into this kind of pathway, it gets worse and worse over time as you're trying to go straight. And the same thing happens with coffee, where if you don't look at the cup and just walk straight, it won't spill. But if you're looking at it and you're trying to correct it, the correction gets worse and worse and worse, and you spill it. So I don't know if that's a real study, but that is a real fact.
You're taking this way deeper than I anticipated.
The more you know.
Way deeper. I love it.
I was going to choose number two for that exact same reason.
I don't believe you.
The metaphysical, like, walking but not paying attention to it.
It's just like a cognitive, side effect, but it is real. The first one is about inboxes.
Inbox anxiety.
And the third one is about chairs.
Chair envy.
Chair envy sounds like what you would choose, but I'm going number 2.
What journals were they in?
They're all made up.
This is not allowable.
None of them are real. It's a wild card. No. The second one, walking with coffee, is the real one.
Yay!
From Physical Review,
Audience got it.
we
Audience.
report on the results of experimental study, the conditions under which coffee spills for various walking speeds and initial liquid levels in the cup. But you won't believe this, but peculiarities around the common cup size and the coffee properties and the biomechanics of walking proved responsible for coffee actually spilling while you walk.
The study sounds awesome. Like,
I'm still thinking about the first one and would there be enough people?
no, there's nobody. There's
The research is waiting for you to do it, Shonna.
I will say chair envy. I do have chair envy. I will look longingly at someone else's chair.
Yeah.
And chair thieves are real in the office as well. Yes, someone agrees over here.
chair thieves, you're saying. Like,
Chair thieves
someone
exist.
steals your chair. What do? I mean, do you put a little sticker on it that says it's yours and then you find them? Like, I don't understand.
You take it back. Yeah. It's office warfare. We've never really covered this.
Or you damage it just enough that no one else wants to take it.
I have inbox anxiety as well. I mean, I made these up. So, I mean,
Or
it's
you,
really heavy.
you put a note on it that says, I have BO, and then nobody wants to touch it.
I think you would just be known
Tara
at that
is so
point.
into my sense of humor. I'm noticing none of this lands. Just getting all negative.
All right, where do you want to go next? Where do you want to go next?
Do we have another confusion matrix, or are we doing some
That
nerdery?
is it.
All right, let's do some nerdery. The nerdery. This first article, the reason why I chose it is, and I may be wrong about this, but I saw you share it, Tara, a few months ago. And so I was like, all right, we'll choose that one for SIOP. So how to survive an AI revolution in HR, cultural change and the immediate action. So the first part of the article does a lot of explaining about why we should all be scared of AI. I think we've talked about that ad nauseum. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip to the recommendations of what we should do about it. So there were 5 recommendations here. Constantly upskill decision makers about AI, collaborate across functional groups to manage AI initiatives, pursue effective change management related to AI, embrace AI as both a neutral tool and collaborator, actively pursue ethical and responsible use of AI. I know for a fact that Shonna read the entire article, so I'm going to go to you first, Shonna, knowing that Tara hasn't seen it before.
Correct.
In fact, there's 2 people on the panel that have not seen it. So it's just you and me.
I just want to point out my high conscientiousness. Before we start.
She did show up an hour early
yeah.
as well. We weren't expecting that, but we appreciate it.
Well, because I was trying to make sure that I could get my caffeine before we started. But
You've got a cappuccino martini in front of you. I'm
it's
just saying.
true. It's true. I'm keeping my eye on it. This is one of these cases where what I like about this is a really tangible example to discuss the scientist practitioner model.
Well, how do you do?
So
It's like there's a theme in the podcast. How weird.
all right. So you didn't talk about this, but the front part where it's like all the reasons why you should be afraid.
Yeah.
Number 7 is the behavior of many AI systems cannot be exhaustively vetted in advance. The practical guidance then offered is we recommend you generally do not trust vendor claims without additional research, in large part because vendors in the space often have much greater expertise in AI development than in HR practices. So you can't vet all the claims. Don't trust the vendors. And then they say, this situation is unlikely to resolve soon, leaving the burden on HR departments to conduct their own rigorous internal research
Oh, good Lord.
on the validity of potential solutions before adoption.
Yeah. And they're totally equipped to do it too.
And how do you rigorously evaluate it before you adopt it? If you know what I mean, it's like, so here's the thing.
Cross validation, local validation,
Yes.
but
So there's things that you can
that takes
do,
time.
and
Takes time.
there are
It's
practical
faithfully.
guidelines that you can offer in these situations. This is not it, because like what my challenge is that like I think sometimes what we forget as people who value science and evidence is that you actually have to try things before you can collect the science and the evidence. And so like where I think I would love to see documents like this go is some helpful frameworks on like how do you actually move
experiment
forward and experiment, and like how you evaluate the risk of the scenarios and the implications, and then what does that mean for the strategies that you have to evaluate with what levels of fidelity given the level of risk that you have in an environment. One example of ways that I've tried to do this in the past is I co-authored a chapter for the SIOP's practice handbook on training and learning with Kurt Krager.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an area where in HR tech right now, a huge infusion of capital to build new, personalized development tools and all of that. And same situation, right? Like it's all evolving fast. Like how do you possibly make good decisions when you're stuck between like marketing and a lack of academic evidence around these tools? Well, we know what makes learning and training work. We have a science of workplace instruction, and Kurt has done some great work outlining what those evidence-based principles are. And so you can help practitioners say, like, the answer is not like, don't do anything until you have data. The answer is like, this is all probabilistic. What gives us the best chance that this tool will work while we run, small scale pilots or whatever the case may be. And the more of those principles that are present in a solution, the more likely it is that it'll work, right? So I think it's things like that where it's like, how do we get concrete about like, what's the guidance that we can give that doesn't say just like, don't innovate? Because that doesn't seem realistic to me. Like, so
you're advocating for rapid prototyping, rapid experimentation, even if it incurs a little bit of risk in the process.
Yes. I mean, ultimately, I think at a time where the context is changing, the solution sets are changing, you have to, and we all believe in experimentation. Like that's why we're here, right? So I think it's like, what's the way to do that responsibly? How do we give practitioner guidance about like, how do we innovate responsibly with scientific?
I love this because like, think how fast like just the LLMs are advancing. Like they essentially hit the scene 2.5 years ago, and we're light years ahead. And it's gonna, by the time we get to Christmas time, it's gonna be way different than it is now. So if we're still trying to validate today's model.
So and exactly, and the technology will change.
Yes,
and it will
absolutely, 100%.
Different, but these basic principles of human nature and learning and motivation and all of these things are pretty robust. We have old, good, rigorous science on that. And so I think it can be both.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to me, that is a great example of like, sort of how we can better navigate the gap.
I really like that framing because I think most people think that the two options are do a rigorous through validation study or do nothing and just buy it and use it and you go to town. Also, I sort of hear you volunteering to write the next SIOP white paper on this topic, which is really nice of you. It's going to be a really great paper.
What you say.
Well,
Hashtag fractional insights.
Yeah, I mean, but I think so. The chapter that I wrote with Kurt, I think is a great model. And even though we wrote that chapter 4 years ago, I think it's slated to be in print next year. So watch for. Again, like this is why we can't.
The speed of academic publishing.
The speed of publishing.
Yeah.
But another case is like that. This is how we consult with our clients on like things like AI and assessments and intersection there. It's like by the time we would finish our analysis, like new things are coming out. We're learning new things, and so like how do you really help even the vendors who are building these tools like think about like okay, they can't wait until the science is supporting what they're building, but they also have a responsibility in this, and so like. What does that look like for the research pipeline where you're not slowing down?
There's specific tech, but I mean, there's a reason why like IOs have theory and practice, right? Like we have well-grounded sort of theoretical foundations that in theory should not change, right? And you can rely on these despite the fact that the technology is improving.
What? Just a side note, but go ahead.
No.
Okay. I wanted to mention quickly that a few years ago, my students and I did a study where we audited all the past SIOP programs to see what the lag was between when a technology was sort of part of popular awareness and when the first SIOP presentation on that technology was, and the average lag was 6 years.
Yeah.
And so we wrote a paper about it, and the title of the paper was An Urgent Call for IO Psychologists to Do More Timely Technology Research. And then it took 3 years to get it published.
Yeah. So then you were 9 years behind.
It was accepted right away, and then it was just in the publication lag for 3 years. So.
But this is the other thing. I'm like, what's the right format for these things? And
Podcast.
So Kurt is a fantastic scientist practitioner, and he and I hadn't collaborated before on anything before this chapter. But one reason we got along so well on it is we got together, and the charge was to like take what are all the emerging, L&D trends and evaluate them through the lens of like, does the science support this kind of thing? And we were both looking at each other and we're like, the emerging trends, by the time this thing gets published, aren't going to be emerging anymore. So like, that's not like the hard copy book model is not the model, right? To evaluate that. And so we were really looking at like, what's the way that we can have something that's actually going to stand the test of time. But similarly, so another recommendation in the report is to constantly educate executives on how to critically evaluate AI tools. Right.
Can I criticize that for a second?
So I said this to my co-founder, Erin, and she immediately says, "Oh, they'll love that." Yeah.
Well, and why would they listen to us? I mean, honestly, if we already just said we're 6 years behind on everything, why would they even care what we have to say? I guess my perspective on it,
because they don't know.
And one of the things I've been banging on about for years is, why are we only evaluating tools that other people build? Why are we not the builders of those tools? Because we have all the skills to do that. Why not be the innovators? And then we don't have to talk about, well, we don't trust these folks from other fields because it's our field building it.
Well, I think some of us are. I really do. I think some of us are. I'm seeing more and more IOs move into technology, companies, and also I'm seeing, a lot more like entrepreneurship in IO, which I, obviously biased, but I think that's really exciting. And in fairness, also there's other ways to contribute to that via being an advisor, board member, consultant. Like I think there's other ways. But I think in this, like, why would they listen to us? But I think like part of when our field is really at its best, what I see is really clear thinking and first principles and core questions, right? Like that's what the criterion problem was. It's like, what does it mean? Like, what does performance mean? And often these simple, most enduring questions are the most powerful. And so like in this, I don't think it's about necessarily having to constantly educate the executives on the newest AI tools and how to evaluate from that standpoint. I think it's things like if we go to the SIOP principles, we have a core set of questions that are going to apply to any solution, regardless how the technology is showing up in that moment. And those are the questions that I think we need to be arming them with, that we can put in the white paper. That doesn't even have to be the job of every IO psychologist practitioner out there to come up with that and keep reinventing it,
So the core question, and while Cole pots that up, are we overestimating the predictive power of GMA for job performance due to outdated methods for correcting for range restriction? So sometimes these meta-analytic corrections can inflate the correlation up to 0.88. Leading GMA to be considered one of the best predictors of performance, but critics argue that these are unrealistic assumptions. So essentially, they conducted 2 studies using the Wonderlic test, 4 time waves between 1973 and 2014, as well as a meta-analysis of 649 studies. And what they found is that due to the rising education and self-selection into jobs, today's applicant pool is more homogenous than it's ever been in the past. And GMA validities are declining. There's clear declining effect over time of GMA. So practical implications like update your corrections specifically with local norms because the population mean isn't what it used to be.
I think that our field has sort of built itself on some truisms, right? And this is one of them, that, of course, the best predictor of job performance is cognitive ability. And I don't think we've done enough to ask ourselves not whether that's true, but why it's true, and what that might mean for how we build work and how we think, I mean, criterion problem, right? But I would love to spend more energy just asking ourselves why we see the patterns that we see. And I don't think that like playing games with statistics will actually answer that question. It might answer some other question, but that's not the one that I care about, frankly.
Corrections are weird for sure. And I mean, ever since the advent of the printing press, like the value of crystallized intelligence is dropping. And GMA comprises both crystallized and fluid intelligence. I think that we are going to see a premium on fluid intelligence. So if you want to predict narrow sort of skills, i.e., knowledge workers specifically, you're going to need fluid intelligence. I think it's going to always be king. However, like Gen AI, I think that's eroding our fluid intelligence as well. Has become too addicted to this sort of thing.
I mean, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I don't know that I would go as far as to say that knowledge workers need a bunch of fluid intelligence and other people don't. I think some knowledge work.
You don't think so?
Well, I think a lot of work that is skilled trades requires a lot of flexibility and creativity and problem solving, and it's not as useful of a categorization as maybe we think it is. But.
Well, I mean, there's a reason like the McDonald's workers like have like pictures of the Happy Meal on the register, right? It's just like trying to remove as much cognitive ability from that equation overall because it equates the performance across people in that way.
Can I tell you what I really applaud about this article?
Please.
I feel like I was such a like wet blanket for the last one, so I gotta redeem myself. So what I really like about it is that it combines an observation about how the world is changing with some reflection on questioning assumptions in our accepted methodologies.
Yep.
And I think that's a really healthy practice and something that we should all be doing on an ongoing basis in our work, which is, because like what the premise of the article is that this is being driven by essentially organizations using proxy variables like education and credentialing. And that's what's, leading to this being an overcorrection. As the world is migrating towards this skills-based organization or whatever, will that change again? But I think to Tar's point, it's like, it's hard to notice like what patterns are going to occur and when they should maybe cause that trigger for us to reassess something or check again, unless you're clear on why. Unless you're clear on why and what are the assumptions that are underlying what we do and what we, sort of take as gospel today. And there should be no sacred cows, right? No. It's not like falling in love with a method for the method, your hammer and everything is your nail. I think it's holding everything loosely and it's, best available evidence, best available methods that continue to evolve.
Well, and to build on that point, kind of buried in there was the concept that there's like this leakage where it's becoming less and less, predictive over time. And as a consequence, things like a credential being a proxy for GMA is becoming less and less efficacious over time as well. And what are the implications of that for society? But this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you, Tara, and you, Shonna, for being willing to be a part of this. Thank you so much for being here. Scott, any parting words for them before we wrap up?
We'll do better next time. See you 2026.
Or maybe you won't. Who knows?
Maybe you don't.
Where can they find you guys?
Michigan State University, that's probably the best place. Or at SIOP. I really like meeting new people at SIOP. So if you see me walking around, I hope you'll come say hi.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same on open introductions, but also fractionalinsights.ai. You can find me on LinkedIn. Stay pretty active, so reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
All right. Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct live at SIOP with our guests Tara Behrend and Shonna Waters. Thanks for joining us today, guys.